Good.
Good morning, Troy Love. How are ya?
I am doing well. How are you today?
It's a hectic morning, but it's a sunny day and it's cooler in Arizona, and you know
Yes,
you, you just keep doing the next right thing, right?
right. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I've had to put my sweatpants on in the morning to go walk my dogs instead of my shorts, which I know that sounds like first world problems, but
It is, but yeah, the wind chill in Arizona. It was 39 degrees yesterday when I was running.
mm-hmm.
I had my sleeves, I had long sleeves on, sleeves all pulled
Mm-hmm.
down. So yeah, so it's chilly, but I'm not complaining because in August it was wretched. I have to admit. So anyway,
Right.
but
Well, and I still never will have to shovel snow as
correct.
long
Yeah.
as I live here. So
Yes, I'm
I'll sign up for
totally
that.
good with that. Yeah. So, yeah. So we've invited questions. So if any of you have questions, otherwise Troy always has good topics to talk about, and we can go that route. But if you have questions that you'd like to ask, we'd welcome
Yeah.
legitimate questions.
Yeah, that would be great. So, hello. My name's Troy Love, as it says on the bottom. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I live in Yuma, Arizona, and I do facilitate one and a half of the sex and healing relationship groups that we run, the drop-in groups. I've been covering for my buddy Joe on Mondays, and I'll still be doing that off and on. But I am moving back to Fridays, so those are men's only groups that focus on addiction recovery, and it's great. And then I get to be with you, Tammy, for the fourth Wednesday of the month, and we talk about attachment wounds and healing from shame and all of those things. So I have things that I can share with you today, but if you do have questions, if what would help me is there's a lot of names that I haven't seen before, and there's a couple of names that I have. If you're not familiar with the concept of attachment wounds and how they work, if you could just put that in the chat for me, that would help me to just kind of have an idea of what's how many of you like this maybe is your first or second time familiar with the work that I do, so that I can try to manage the population that I'm talking to, because I'll use words and some people won't know what in the world I'm talking about. So
Well, and somebody added it's a new term and first time in for me. So welcome. We love having you here, and he has done a number of these. So thrilled you're here, but also I think you'll find the resources on sexandrelationshiphealing.com to be useful. The previously recorded, are great. And he mentioned the drop-in group. So let me just take a quick moment and talk about what those are. Unlike this, where this is, we can see each other and we know who's participating, the drop-in groups are not recorded and are for specific populations. For example, Troy mentioned that he does moderate several of the men's groups, and we're incredibly grateful. And I hear good things about that. And but we've got like today we've got a betrayed partner group at 12:30 Pacific time. There's groups for male partners, female addicts. There's different groups, and they are all Zoom so that you can connect with other people, get support, give support, and and be connected. Again, not recorded. So I would invite you on sexandrelationshiphealing.com. You'll see the event under events. You'll see the calendar of what is offered. Also, another resource for you, beyond the podcasts that are all free, the Sex, Love, and Addiction podcast series, and Troy has done one of those with Dr. Rob, has had over 500,000 downloads. I haven't checked lately, but it was like 570,000 or something like that last I checked. So that's a great resource. There's a lot of information. And then there are work groups. There's a couples work group starting on the 7th of November that is a Zoom, but it will be structured information, but also some process time. And then there's a guy's Sex Addiction 101 work group starting November 2nd. And then there won't be another one till next year. So on seekingintegrity.com, you'll see information about those. And the women's work group, I'm so happy, will be starting in January as well. So those are all resources. Those are just a tip of the iceberg. Those are the easily accessible on our websites. We have a treatment program. We do lots of other things. So check all those resources out. But there's so much misinformation out on the internet. So we want to provide you with as much true, researched, good information from experts as possible. So, okay. So questions, any questions, put them in the Q&A comments. Feel free, like he said, first time on the webinar, great. Healing of my initial wound. Oh, I'm here regarding healing of my initial wounds and have heard a few of your podcasts, which I'm now grateful. I have no questions right now. Thank you. Fantastic. So thanks for being here.
Yeah. All right. Let me share my screen a little bit, and you have to give me permission to do that.
I probably do. Let me figure out how to do that. Let's see.
So the concept of attachment wounds is something that isn't new. It's just what I use the word because it helps me explain to myself mostly, and then also to the clients that I work with about what's happening. The attachment wounds are like sunburns, where if you went to the beach and you forgot to put sunblock on and you got baked, it's really painful. It's hard to move, but you can still function. You can go to work the next day. You can do the things that you need to do. But if your somebody bumps up against your attachment wound at work or wherever you're at, man, immediately the moment they touch it, it creates pain. There is a visceral reaction inside of us as we're dealing with that pain, and it's a neurological response. It happens instantaneously. We either pull away to try and deal with, like, don't touch me, or we may even aggressively push the other person away because they have bumped up against that wound. And on this screen, what I've identified is there are emotional relationship wounds that I call attachment wounds. We're wired for connection. We're wired to be connected with each other neurologically, psychologically, emotionally, physically, spiritually. We're wired to be connected to each other. And when things happen that break those connections, that then creates pain. And sometimes they're big T, capital T trauma experiences, such as abuse being one of those, where maybe you encountered sexual abuse or a sexual assault or those kind of things, where they can be big T traumas. And sometimes they're little T traumas. They may not seem like that big of a deal, but they happened over and over and over and over again. And that also creates it does the same thing in your body, whether or not it was big or little. It does the same thing in your body. And now there's even at a neurological, biological, cellular level, the research has shown that those wounds are there. And then we continue trying to interact with each other. And in our most intimate relationships, the chances are that your partner's going to bump up against one of those wounds is really, really high. And so then we will do the same thing. We'll either pull away because we're trying not to be hurt, or we'll push him away as a way of like, don't do that. Well, I don't want you to hurt me. So it's a very attachment theory based grounded perspective of I'm going to be avoidant. I also might become very clingy. I can't think of the word right now, but I'm very clingy. Like, please don't leave me. Please stay. Anxious. I've become very anxious. And that's all wired in this attachment stuff that's going on. And for me, the way that I've been able to understand it is that it's connected to these wounds. I was talking to somebody just the other day, and they said, I'm looking at these wounds, and I've done the wound assessment that you've given, and I really, as I'm looking over my life, I really haven't had any of these. And I made the joke, well, wow, like the rest of us probably hate you right now. But the truth is that I think he was telling the truth. I have heard of a couple of people, a couple, who grew up in wonderful, idyllic homes. There's a lot of love and compassion and support and all of those kind of things. So y- there are some people who maybe don't have many of these, or if they do, they weren't big and deep enough that really have caused lasting trauma for them. And I'm grateful for that they have not had those. Oftentimes, at the same time, I feel like there's some denial about some of these, that you're not really looking at or even acknowledging that that was a wound. I get I get why people would do that. It's not a judgment. If you really did grow up and you didn't have any of these wounds, wow, that is beautiful. I'm grateful. And I believe that we need some of those kind of people on the planet, because it's almost like they're able to navigate through this and have a different perspective. I don't know about you though. For me, I got pretty much all of these. And so I know that because some of these run deeper than others, when they get hit, I'm reacting that pretty predictably, a way of either pulling away, withdrawing, shutting down, or pushing people away, becoming almost aggressive in the way that I deal with it. And it's a pretty predictable pattern that I watch time and time again as I'm working with couples and they're coming in for couples counseling, and I watch it when I'm working with individuals and how they're even dealing with their addiction or their betrayal trauma. They're doing some of the very similar ways, and to me it's all tied back to these six wounds of loss, neglect, rejection, abandonment, betrayal, and abuse. So to me it's important to name that wound. What are the wounds that I have? The person who posted their question said that they feel rejection and abandonment often. I think it's important to put words to that, because just like in the hospital, when a nurse is going in and doing a wound assessment, they will identify what kind of wound is this? Is it a burn? Is it a necrotizing fasciitis? Is it because of a pressure ulcer? They will identify what kind of wound it is so that they know what kind of treatment will be most effective for that wound. Do they need to let it dry out? Do they need to keep it moist? Do they need to cover it up? Um, do they, how do we do that? So we put in words to it so that we can know what do we need to do about it. So being able to identify that is the first step. But the second is, I tell people it's not the wound that is necessarily the problem. Yes, it's horrible that that thing happens to you, but it's not the wound that's the problem. It's what we end up believing about ourselves as a result. And especially as children, as these wounds were created, we began to try and make sense as to why these wounds were happening to us. And we begin to come up with some beliefs that then get wired into our nervous system. And when the wound gets smacked, immediately those core beliefs get activated. I'm not enough. I can't trust anybody. There's nothing I can do about it. I'm a horrible person. I'm flawed. I'm defective. The world is not safe. There, I'm just. It's hopeless for me. Those core beliefs get anchored deep down into our nervous system, and that is where the distress really takes place. It's, yes, the wound happened and it happened a long time ago, and I want to honor that and be truthful about it. But the wound isn't necessarily happening today. Maybe my neurological amazing network picked up that you kind of gave me a dirty look. You looked at me like that, And immediately that activated my rejection wound. Nothing was said. You didn't say anything, but immediately that hit my rejection wound, and that activates my core beliefs of, oh, I must have done something wrong. I probably made you mad at me. You probably hate me. All of those core beliefs just now have like exploded in my brain, none of which may be based on any truthful evidence, but my neurological network, my brain picked that up, micro expression picked it up, and bam, it hit that. And now I'm having a trauma response, even though the other person may not even know it. And so it's challenging what those core beliefs are and how do we rewrite them so that that's not, when I see that look, I'm like, I become curious and think, oh, you look like your eyebrow just went up with something going on. And I can be curious rather than, oh, I must be horrible. Thoughts about that, or any insight with that, Tammy?
I was thinking, yeah, and it could have been I just had something in on my contact lens, but you read it as, as a sideways look of disdain or something like that, but I was thinking how easy it is to pick up misinformation, because we're doing it on such a cellular level rather than, going, being curious about what really is happening or not happening.
Yeah. So I appreciate those who are here for the first time. If you would like to put in the chat or in the questions anything that came up for you as I was explaining that, so just so I know that if I'm resonating. There was a question about, can humans with antisocial personality disorder attach to another person? That I don't know how to answer that in a yes or no. Oftentimes, people with an antisocial personality disorder or borderline personality disorder or any of those personality disorders, underneath all of that, there's probably some significant trauma. If we could get to a place where they were able to work through and heal from some of that trauma, they might be able to connect with another person. They may not. So I don't know how to, I can't, it's an individual case by case basis. What I do know from the research, especially Brene Brown's research about empathy, is that in order for me to have empathy, I have to have the ability to recognize my pain, my emotions, my feelings about myself. I have to have the ability to be able to do that so that I can have empathy and put myself in your shoes. And people who are sociopaths or people with antisocial personality disorder, for whatever reason, their brain does not have the capacity to do that. Can we teach them how to do that? Yes. There's trauma training and a lot of things that we would need to do to be able to do that. Yes. A lot of them don't have any desire because they really just don't care. Um, but can they? Yes, I think they can with a lot of work. It's so I'm trying not to answer that as a black and white, but in order to be able to really heal, we have to have empathy. Even with the model that I have and dealing with the shadows of shame, we have to have empathy. And people who are sociopaths really don't have the capacity to be able to put themselves in somebody else's shoes and experience what life might be like for them. And so it becomes enormously challenging. So.
So the next question is, if you have experienced a sexual assault, is it possible for the wound to do the opposite and make you act out more on a sexual level?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, even without sexual assault, but if you, many of the men that I work with who are sex addicts had some kind of sexual assault when they were children. Some kind of, they were molested or abused or something. Not everybody, but a lot have. And now they are acting out sexually in ways that go absolutely against their value system, and they don't understand why they are. part of that is it's a trauma response. What we're trying to do is create a different outcome. We we don't want that outcome. That was so painful before, even if we numbed it and didn't recognize it, but we didn't want that. And so we want to be able to have a sexual experience that is healthy and wonderful and beautiful and connected and all of that. But because that trauma is in the way, I keep redoing the same thing over and over again. I keep replaying the past, which then builds onto the shame and makes me feel like I'm a horrible person. It amplifies the core beliefs that I already have, that there's something wrong with me, I'm flawed and defective, I can't trust other people. It just amplifies all of that. But when we take a look back and say, wow, what you're really doing is you're trying to treat your wound. You're trying to treat that abuse wound and everything that goes with it. And we can look at it from that way and we can start to have some compassion about that wound instead of, wow, there is something seriously wrong with you that you keep doing that behavior over and over. Like, if we can actually sit back and have some compassion and say, whoa, how could maybe we could address that wound and heal it a little bit more. And the surprising thing is that when we do, the need to compulsively act out starts to decrease. The need to behave in ways that go against your value system starts to shift. And it becomes less of a driving force of I'm trying to heal that in a really maladaptive way. I'm actually finding some ways that I can heal that from a compassionate, connected way. And wow, I'm feeling so much better about myself. I don't think I want to do that anymore. I don't want to hurt anybody else. I don't want to keep hurting me. There's a shift that happens as we really start to do that wound care.
So the next question, and which I think is a good tie into that one too, is the response, if the response is automatic, how do we stop the response to the trigger once triggered?
So it is automatic. It is lightning fast. And if you've ever read Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, and there's a couple of other books that also talk about that. It is happening at a cellular level. So there's not a whole lot you can do to stop it in that moment. You never even really know when the trigger is going to happen. I mean, we can become so obsessively paranoid that we keep the wall up really high so that nothing will affect us, and even that's not that effective. But we never really know when that trigger might happen. But what we can begin to do is recognize what that feels like. How do we notice it? We can start doing some mindfulness, practicing that. And in those moments, instead of going where we normally go, we can start to take a look at the self-compassion, the curiosity, trying to radically accept ourselves in that moment, to just breathe and say, okay, whew, I am really triggered right now. Well, and in those moments, those slight things, even breathing itself can shift what's happening in our brain, because immediately our brain, the amygdala has gone off, the it's thinking we're in an emergency, it's pumping cortisol and adrenaline through your body. Those are all chemical reactions that have been triggered by a thought. It's going to take some time to clean up that chemical reaction in the brain. But if I learn how to breathe, and I learn how to breathe from my diaphragm, and I just stop for a moment and I'm breathing from here, it automatically sends the signal to the brain that we're not in an emergency. We don't have to go into fight or flight or freeze anymore. And that stops that process. Does it make you like immediately calm down? Sometimes no. So we breathe a little bit more. We use some other grounding tools. One of the videos that Tammy and I've done together has some of those. If you have a therapist, your therapist probably has some. You could just Google grounding tools. There's lots of them to be able to get yourself grounded and breathe again, clean up what's going on in your mind, because your prefrontal cortex has stopped working by that point. So we can put some blood back into our prefrontal cortex, and then we can make some decisions. Okay, what will be in the best interest of myself and others? Stephen Stosny, he he's written several books. He works a lot with women who have been in abusive relationships, and one of the tools that he does is a core values exercise where he mindfully walks you through imagining the things that you think are beautiful in the world, the people who love you, the things that you think are um, wonderful, the last time that you did something compassionate for somebody else, the last time somebody did something compassionate for you. And then what he has you do is once you kind of have that image in your mind, he has you practice running through that list 10 times a day for every day. He doesn't necessarily specify time, but every day. And it really only takes about 30 seconds once you have the list done. Sitting at a stoplight waiting for it to turn green, you run through that list and you run through that list. And what you're doing is you're creating a new neurological network in your brain that says, I am worthy of love and belonging. I matter. There are people that love me, so that in the future, when that trigger happens, I can access that because I've been practicing accessing that and practicing accessing that. I can access that. I can breathe into that. And whew, I'm going to be okay. And that can really slow that trigger down or clean it up and help clean it up faster as well. So that's another strategy that you may want to check out.
And I think that that's great for addressing when the trigger hits. I think also making sure that we're taking care of ourselves so that we have more bandwidth because, in AA, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, I added S for stressed, but, I was HALT. And
Hmm.
I think the more, the more I'm too hungry, I'm too angry, I'm too lonely, I'm too tired, I'm too stressed, the less bandwidth I have and the more likely a trigger is to throw me over the edge. And so I think having the ability to do more self-care and start recognizing, I've talked before that relapse doesn't happen the moment it happens. It happens, when that look came across and I was like, wow, Troy must be mad at me. I must have done something to offend him. Da, 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 da. So all of those things, so the more we're taking care of ourselves and doing the right things, I love, having that list and practicing that because, then that's a go-to. Then that's okay, I'm going to be intentional about picking that rather than, than being into the trigger and into the relapse. So you're putting this up because somebody asked about uh, the core values. So neglect, rejection, abandonment, betrayal, abuse.
Yeah.
And then the next question is, how can you ask for feedback and be curious without the other person being defensive?
That is good. And again, I don't know the actual situation that you're involved in, but even saying it like that, hey, I would like to ask for some feedback, but I don't want to do it in a way that may or bump up against one of your wounds. What would work best for me in asking you for some feedback and being curious that can respect your space and your boundaries and yet help me understand what I could do better? So even just asking that might be a way to do that.
One of the things that I've found too is the story I'm telling myself. That has been extremely useful. Kristen Snowden has talked about that, and I've used it on other things. I use that. The story I'm telling myself is, whatever it is, and then the person can go, like I said, no, I have dirt in my contact lens. I wasn't giving you a silly look. It was like there's a legitimate. I mean, whatever. Somebody can correct me or go, yeah, oh yeah, I was thinking about something at work and I'm sure that, I did have a funny look, but it was my brain was over here. It wasn't at you. Or they can say, yeah, you really annoyed me, or that really annoyed me when you did whatever. But that's an opportunity to be curious, and share my feelings about, what I'm feeling or seeing without it being, you, Troy, you gave me a dirty look and, what are you, whatever. So that can usually take the energy out of that.
Yep. And we've talked about the burpees before, blame being one of those. So there's a way to be able to say it, and what I found helps is if I just state the facts first and then following up with, and the story I'm telling myself about that is, I don't know if my story is correct, could you help me find out if it is, but I noticed that your eyebrow went up and you were like winking a little bit. So the story I'm telling myself is, I must have really made you angry. That's what I'm telling myself. And now my shadows of shame showed up and told me how horrible of a person I am. And I'm feeling really overwhelmed. Can you help me understand what's going on there? And the other person's like, what? No, like, yeah, a contact problem. It wasn't about that. Okay.
So the next question is, what is the start to recognize my own emotions? I am starting to be able to do such, but as a child with parents who were alcoholics and told us not to feel, ask for things, or tell anyone things, it has taken me a long time, 3 years in SA recovery, to begin to understand. Is there a better trick or easier thing to try to help identify these feelings? I mean, I know I'm frustrated or angry, but I can't vocalize it due in large part, I think, because of the fact that I wasn't allowed to for such a large part of my life. Thank you for sharing that. That is so typical, don't you think?
Yes. And especially for men, um, not that women don't have this problem too, but it's for men, we are really trained not to have emotion. You don't want to be a wimp and a weenie, so don't let anyone know that you're sad. Maybe you can be angry, but man, you got to keep your temper in check, like all of that. So I want to just validate that. And I appreciate your willingness to ask that question. So I start with 3 core emotions, and you mentioned one of those being anger. Anger, fear, and sadness. Those are 3 core emotions that all of us feel on a regular basis, and we don't put names to it. Now, can we elaborate on those? Yes, absolutely. But let's just take a look at those 3 core emotions for a minute. Anger comes from a sense that something was taken from you without your permission. You didn't say it was okay. And now you're angry because it was taken. Sadness comes because you lost something and it may not be coming back. So there's a grieving part about that. And then fear comes from a sense that something bad might happen and I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to handle that or do something to stop it. So those are what those 3 emotions are. And so just practicing saying, I am angry right now. This is how it feels in my body. I am sad right now. This is how it feels in my body. And even if you did that at the end of the day and you just did an emotional check-in with yourself, okay, did I feel angry today? When did I feel it? Oh, I felt it then. What did I feel in my body? Oh, that's what it feels like. And giving yourself permission to say it, to put words to it, and identify what it is that you feel in your body is a start to do it. Another a way to do that is to learn how to do that with other people. So having a sponsor, having a men's group, a women's group, a group of people, I don't necessarily mean therapy, although that's fantastic, but even just having a support group where you can talk about those emotions and there's a place to honor them, I think is really, really an important place to do that because the rest of the world's like, no, you're not allowed. You're not allowed to feel any feelings. Just stop it. It's really silly. Um, the Disney movie Enchanted came out like 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I don't know. And the princess had lived in the animated world, and now she's in New York City, and she's having this moment with the guy who's letting her stay at her house, and she starts to say, I'm I'm angry. I'm angry right now. And she's like, oh my, and she laughs. Oh my gosh, I'm angry. I love that moment because that is what it's like. Ah, This is the feeling that I'm having, and I'm putting words to it. I'm angry right now. Now, the fear is if I say it, you're going to run away. You're going to tell me that I'm not allowed to be angry, that there's something wrong with me. There's going to be shame that's going to show up and say, no, you cannot feel that. Yes, we'll work through that. But mindfully saying, I'm going to give myself place to say what I feel, and it's okay. It doesn't mean that you have to change, doesn't mean you have to change, doesn't mean the world has to change, but I'm going to say, I'm sad. I'm scared right now. I'm going to give myself space and just sit with that. I'm going to journal about that. I'm going to call a friend. I'm going to talk about it. Can you give me space to be able to talk about my anger right now? Yeah, that's how it works.
Well, and it's interesting to me because sometimes, well, for me in particular, anger was a cover for hurt. So you mentioned something was taken away and that I didn't give permission to. And, anger feels better. It feels powerful. It feels like I'm not a victim. And hurt feels like, oh, it hurt me. And so like I had to learn not only anger, but I also had to learn the underlying hurt. And it's a process. I love that you're reaching out and then you're asking, and and in honor of that, there's that emotion chart, like it might
Yeah.
be a handy resource to have around. And there's a test, and I forgot what it was, but it was like 20 questions where you had to identify somebody's facial
Oh, yeah.
emotions. And that it's interesting because so many emotions, going to your point about like that look that you gave or whatever, like there's so many emotions. It's really challenging. Like I did that in a group, and many of us, in fact, no one got all 20 correct, but how you can misinterpret what someone's feeling or the emotion they're trying to convey when you're looking at their face. So it's complicated, but I love that you're stepping into it.
The graphic I'm sharing right now is what you and I've been talking about, Tammy. So at the core is that pain. Those attachment wounds is at the core of all those feelings. And then the core beliefs, I'm not allowed to share how I feel, but I'm actually angry. I'm afraid, I'm sad. And then shame wraps over it and says, no, you can't have that. So in the healing, in the recovery process, we spend a lot of time in that blue ring right there, putting words to, giving ourselves space to express those feelings in a safe place. And what that does, it begins to challenge the black ring, the core beliefs of, wow, I can share my feelings. I am okay with being able to have anger and fear and sadness. There's nothing wrong with me. And we start to challenge those so that eventually we come to a place of peace.
Yeah, because I like the emotions don't go away. We numb them out. We do something that is destructive to us ultimately and to relationships and everything else by trying to, you know, push them down, shove them in a closet. So next question. Good morning, Troy. I've been sober for nearly 1 year and recovery for 6 solid months. That's awesome. In my relationship, I'm having trouble with feeling inadequate, even with my wife telling me I'm adequate for her. I was a gym rat and I was very proud of the training I was doing to keep in shape, but my training was a co-addiction. And I say this because I was using a variety of performance enhancing drugs and training 2 to 4 hours daily. I have not trained since I was discovered, and I have gained 30 pounds since then, which increases my feeling of inadequacy. I'm trying to figure out why having this image of fitness is such a big key of helping myself feel adequate. And it was such a big part of my identity. Can you point me in the right direction to figure out what attachment wound is rubbed when I see myself in the mirror and don't see an extremely fit person?
Oh, dude. Thank you. I was like me reading myself right there. Except that I never spent 2 to 4 hours in the gym. I think if I had that kind of time, I probably would have. For me, and I can only speak for me, the wound is rejection. I mean, it's very much, at least for me, tied to my early experiences, especially in PE, in school, with the other boys that I developed later in life. I wasn't good at sports at all. I hated it. And they got bullied a lot. And so I then see these images of these men who are muscular and they have 10% body fat and they've been bodybuilding, and the story, the black ring, the core belief is, well, there's something wrong with me. I'm not good enough. But if I, and that's where the shame comes in, but if I could lift this much, if I could lose this much, if I could develop this many inches on my chest, if I could have this many inches on my biceps, then I will be enough. And so I'm going to work on it, and I'm going to work on it. And it becomes this futile thing. And Jay Stringer in his work identified futility as one of the key drivers of addiction, of this feeling of no matter what I do, it is never going to be enough. But I'm going to keep doing it, and I'm going to keep doing it, and I'm going to keep doing it. And then what happens is we spend 4 to 6 hours at the gym instead of spending time connecting with our family. Like, there's no judgment about that. The same thing with our addictions. We'll turn to food, we'll turn to sex, we'll turn to gambling, we'll turn to shopping as a way of like, I just need a break, because this futility running and over and over and over is so overwhelming. I'm never going to get there. At the root of that, to me, I think, is rejection. That you are not enough. That's the message that comes from rejection. There is something wrong with you and you don't belong here. Shame says, well, judge in particular. I know how to fix that. You get a 28-inch waist with a 50-inch chest, and you have 18-inch biceps, and you have 10% body fat, and then you will be enough. Whoa. And so I get there. And then the judge says, well, that actually wasn't true. Look at this guy over here. Look at that person over there, and the comparison game, and it just keeps going. Underneath that, I think, is the wound of rejection, maybe abandonment, of nobody was there with you, helping you be able to learn that you are okay the way you are. If you want to be healthy and strong and do that, beautiful, wonderful. I support you, and you are enough exactly where you are right now as well. So to me, that's what I think the wound is. I don't know yours, but I would I'm guessing.
That's really helpful. Yeah, and it really is, because we do want to be healthy, but then we go, yeah, I'm an addict. If a little is good, a lot is better, and so, and learning the acceptance, and and I've been there, struggled, gained tons of weight in treatment, and then all of that, and having to, it was just, it's been really challenging, and it's been a journey for me, but learning to do what I can to be healthy, to make it about my health, and not about my looks or what I perceive other people are going to see, but what's going to, uh, so Lulu Cook did so Troy Love, let me, blah, blah, blah. So on intherooms.com, we have Super Saturday Recovery Summit. And Troy has done 2 of those for us, which is great. And the videos are on intherooms.com. But Lulu Cook did a great one and talked about nutritious food. And she talked about why food is important and how it cuts cravings and all of this kind of stuff. And like, I thought, what a beautiful perspective of, I'm choosing to do this because I want to take care of myself in a healthy way, not in a compulsive way. And it's so hard as addicts to get, to get from the, I always said, the middle where we want to be is the thing I was swinging through, and I would touch it only as I was switching to the other side.
Yeah.
And I've learned in recovery, and most of the time now I'm in that zone. Not perfectly, don't have to be, but glad you're here, glad you're in recovery, and just look at it as a journey. My colleague Scott talks about having a 3-circle plan for every addiction, not just sex addiction. And so he works with, all of his sponsees, to have it, whether it's drugs or food or whatever it is. So that, you're identifying this as a co-addiction. It may be a really good place to have what would your outer circles, what would your healthy behaviors be, and then realize, what's going to be middle circle and inner circle. So glad you're here. Next question. I'm deeply troubled as a codependent person with lots of empathy for my former spouse who has, like you said, no empathy for me, but I can feel his pain. And it's really hard while he has deeply traumatized me, but I still feel bad for him while he is the cause. I think all the time, what is wrong with me? For my own recovery, I need to focus on myself, but this is really in my head 24/7.
Thank you for your vulnerability. So you're talking about the betrayal wound, which is deep. And you are also identifying some of the strengths that you have. You have empathy, which is so beautiful. And so I'm grateful that you can hold space. The challenge, like I said, is that the wiring in our brains say that as soon as I think about that betrayal, bam, the question is, well, what's wrong with me? There must have been something wrong with me. And then we can run down that rabbit hole, and your judge, some of you are not familiar with what we're talking about with that, but that inner critic voice in your head, it will give you a list of, well, let me point out all the things that are wrong with you. Well, yeah. And then we look at that and think, oh, that must be true. Yeah, that is, I should have, and I could have, and all that stuff. So part of that is just recognizing, oh, there's my shame talking. That's my shame. I'm going to say, hey, whoa, let me breathe for a minute. Let me check it out. And the first question, is it true? Is it true? Is there something wrong with me? Well, I'm not perfect. Yeah, of course there's things wrong with me, but are there things right with me too? Is it absolutely true that there's something wrong with me? No. What happens to me when I'm fixated on the thought that there's something wrong with me? Well, I tailspin. Who would I be if I was able to let that thought go? Even for the next 5 minutes, who would I be if I was able to let that thought go? Can I come up with some examples of how there isn't anything wrong with me? Can I come up with some examples of how I'm actually in a good place and I'm doing really well? And these are the things that I'm proud about myself, and being able to work through some of that and creating a little bit of a barrier and healing the wound of betrayal. The opposite of betrayal is trust. And it doesn't sound like he's behaving in a way where you're going to be able to trust him. There's no evidence really that they're able, but who in your life do you have that you can turn to for trust? Who in your life can you turn to and say, wow, my betrayal wound just got smacked today, and whew, I immediately started to think there's something wrong with me. Can you just remind me that who you see here, what you see here, what's the light inside that you can see? Can you remind me of what you see? Because I'm having a hard time seeing that myself. Those are some strategies of being able to work through that, but recognizing this is a neurological wiring that's happened in your brain, and we can rewire it. Our brains are so plastic, we can rewire it, but it's going to take some mindful practice, things to do every day, reaching out and those kind of things to help rewire that, so that when it gets hit, wow, yeah, that hurt, that was really painful, and I'm enough, I'm worthy of love and belonging.
So someone suggested that we remind everyone that there's the drop-in group for partners today. I would invite you at 12:30 today, Pacific time. So please, if you haven't already joined the Betrayed Partners Codependent group at 12:30, sexandrelationshiphealing.com, I'd invite you to do that. So And unfortunately, Dr. Rob has an emergency, so I'm going to mute. I'm going to let you keep handling the questions, but I'm going to mute
Sure.
my video and audio, and I'll be, I hope, back.
Okay.
Um, I don't know what's going on, so I'll be back.
Um, it's all right. So the person did say I could ignore that question, but I would be happy to address that if there's time. I'll come back. So the next one is, how do we heal our wounds? Wound care. Quick question mark after that. Yeah, that's a great question. What in the world is wound care? When we take a look at those wounds, loss, neglect, rejection, abandonment, betrayal, and abuse, part of the reason why we name them is because it does help us be able to identify the kind of care that we need. So the opposite of rejection, for example, is acceptance. So the way that I can treat and care for that wound of rejection is finding ways to accept myself, turning to other people who are able to see me. And that's the beauty of going to these drop-in groups or going to a 12-step meeting or something, is we share all of our stuff, and then they give us their phone number and they say, hey, thank you for being here. We're a little bit taken back a little bit, but in that moment, we just did a little bit of wound care about that rejection wound. You mean you just heard that I'm an addict and I've been acting out for 40 years and you still find value in me? Whew, that's a little bit of wound care right there. There's some acceptance there. The opposite of abandonment is presence. How can I be present for myself? How can I find people in my life that might be present for me? The opposite of neglect is attention. How can I pay attention to me? How can I help myself do that in a way that's mindful and compassionate? Who else in my life can I have pay attention to me? Is there anybody in my life that I could pay attention to for a little while and have some mutual connection? Those little tiny things that we can do are part of what wound care looks like. It's a daily practice, sometimes an hourly practice that we can do, so that, and over time, those wounds begin to heal. They're not as tender, they're not as painful. We begin to rewrite the stories, and I come to a place where I know that I'm worthy of love and belonging. So the next one says, I'm a sex addict and my partner and I are both working through it. My mother is a trigger for me and my partner. She rubs up against my attachment wounds often and is also the cause of many of them. She is likely a sex love addict herself, but is in complete denial about her own issues. Any advice on how to navigate, manage interactions with her for both me and my partner? Thank you for posting that. So that is a challenge. When we're doing recovery and our partner maybe is not willing to take a look at their stuff, that can be a big challenge. And it is, there's not a really easy answer for that. What I've found happens is that when one person starts to do their recovery, but the other person isn't willing, it's like the person was way over here and then they're starting to heal and they're starting to connect, and now there's this opportunity where we can connect, but if the person's not doing their stuff, they're going to move on and they're going to be disconnected that way. What we hope is that both partners can recognize, hey, we both have wounds, we both have healing, we can connect, and let's move on this journey together, and we can move together. How you get your partner to do that, there's not a magic answer about that. What you can do is be able to start sharing what your wounds are and your experiences and what would help you in this relationship to heal. It would really help if we could do this together. Would you be willing to be part of this journey with me? This is something that would really help me. And focusing on what your healing looks like with invitations. Would you be willing to join me along the way?
I'm kind of wondering this one, if the mom is a sex addict. I'm not 100% sure when I'm
Yeah,
reading
I
this,
was
but I
having a
kind
hard
of
time.
feel like, yeah, like I think the advice, I think any relationship, whether it's partners or whatever, I think the advice is sound. It's like, the more I start changing, the more somebody's going to react to me differently. But yeah, and at some point, um, there's boundaries, and sometimes, the healthy boundary is I need to set myself aside for at least a time.
Yeah, so if I thank you for clarifying that. If part of that is if your mom is the love and sex addict and she's in denial about her own issues, as you start to tap into your own sense of worth and belonging, you might start to put boundaries in place. Um, that's that's the natural consequence of starting to believe that I'm enough and I matter and I am able to share my feelings and I'm able to voice what is going on. And you are not a safe person for me able to be able to do that. And so I'm probably not going to engage with you as much. And if they don't want to own their stuff, they don't want to own their stuff. But that might be what happens as you continue to heal as boundaries. And I'm not saying you should cut your mother off, and like that's not what I'm saying. But that may be what happens. Is I'm going to start to create a world where I'm getting some of my needs met in places that are healthy, and your mom might not be one of those.
And I don't know if it's a fit, but sometimes the mother and mesh men can be an issue because I'm kind of reading between the lines there. So if that's the case, Dr. Ken Adams did a podcast with Dr. Rob on sex, love, and addiction. Perhaps take a listen to that and see. He's also written a couple of books that may be useful for you too. And then the next question is, say again what sad means.
Yep, and I just put it in the
Oh,
chat.
okay.
Sadness comes from a sense that I lost something and it's not coming back, or if it does come back, it's not going to come back the way that it was before. So there's a grieving that goes with that.
So the next question, this has been such an informative and helpful lecture. I already feel calmer and more accepted. Funny how we tell our young children to express themselves, yet as we get older, we feel shame when we feel we're not allowed to. You're both wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Um, so how do you balance having compassion for our addict and understanding the reason why they act out versus taking care of ourselves and not getting taken advantage of? I'm an anxious attacher and do not know if when to let go and leave the relationship.
Um, so Rob's book Prodependence is really helpful with that, and you may also want to go to the Prodependence group. There's nothing wrong with wanting your partner to get better. Of course you do. You care about them. There's nothing sick. That's not codependent. So I love that you didn't use the word prodependent, but that's what it means. Like, of course you care about them. Um, at the same time, there again, that boundaries starts to come into place of yes, I want you to get better, and I need to be able to be in a space where I can get better too. Hopefully, we can do that together. Maybe we won't, but hopefully we can. I'm going to work on my wounds and try to find places of healing. And I really hope you do too. And hopefully we can come together and create a secure attachment with each other.
And we're almost out of time. Um, I found pics on a sex offender phone of a neighbor that were taken, which were taken without permission. They focused on her bottom. I was shocked initially, then loss of trust and safety, needless to say. I'm back in therapy and have removed myself from the relationship. It has triggered sexual trauma from my childhood and trauma from an adult incident of stalking. I'm very scattered and working on focusing myself. What all can I do?
And because I don't know the particulars or where you live or what resources are available, but the, um, even making a report to the law enforcement, especially if this is already a known sex offender, might be something that you can do to create a sense of safety or accountability anyway, as well as you're doing some of the things that you can do. It's triggered some of your own stuff, so you're back. You can go back in therapy, find support groups for victims of sexual trauma. There are many. Our what we have in our website offers some of that as well. Being able to know that you're not alone with this is part of that.
So I'm going to read you this one quick and then we have to go. I find it so difficult to examine my part without blaming and shaming myself. I made the decision to divorce my SA husband due to his name calling, gaslighting, etc., creating an unsafe home environment for our children. I know he is troubled, but I know I need to do my own healing. Every time I try to examine my wounds, I start obsessing about the demise of my marriage being my fault.
Yeah, and the question right above that, help me address the fact that I make him more important than me. That all kind of goes together. That's shame driven. The voices that are talking to you, although this is, we don't have a lot of time for that, but that's shame driven. The belief that there is something wrong with you and you are not enough and it's your fault. Those are shame based. Those are stories that are not true. And part of this is being able to recognize that's a shame story. It isn't true. How do I shine light on that? How do I shift that? And then how do I begin to figure out what is true? What is true about me? What is true about our situation? Yes, it's sad, and yes, you did make choices to divorce the person, and there are consequences for that. But those may have been the right choices, and it's really painful right now. How do I honor that? How do I wrap myself with love and support from others that say, hey, I get why you did it and you're enough. You can do this. It will be all right. Those are some things that we need to counteract the shame that says, just bad, just horrible.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Troy. I'll see you at the end of November. But as always, if you have questions, you can reach out to Troy. You can reach out to me if it's happy to help. I can always forward them to Troy. But lots of good, great stuff. And remember, guys, join Troy on the drop-in groups that he co-moderates for Monday and moderates for Friday too. So. I hear you typing. Oh, there you go. All right. Thanks,
Yeah.
everybody.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.